Welcome to Told History, where forgotten moments of world history return in calm, immersive stories. Here, you can drift through distant centuries and quietly learn how people lived, feared, built and dreamed. In this journey, the past unfolds gently, one scene at a time. If you enjoy restful storytelling that brings history closer, please like and subscribe. Your support helps these quiet voyages continue into many more lost worlds. In this video, we follow the long path toward the Great Wall of China by beginning before the empire itself existed. Tonight, we enter an older landscape of rival kingdoms, uncertain borders, and early frontier defences. As the story unfolds, you will hear how ambition, fear, and geography slowly shaped an idea larger than any single ruler, an impossible wall imagined long before it was ever joined together. Chapter 1. Before the Wall, Before the Emperor. Long before one ruler gathered China beneath a single crown, the land lay divided among powerful states. Each watched the others with caution across valleys, rivers and open plains. Dawn mist drifted over distant frontiers, where riders carried news along narrow trails. In that older age, before empire and before the famous wall, the borders were already alive with worry, patience and preparation. This was the age remembered as the Warring States period, a time that lasted from the 5th century BCE until the unification of Qin in 221 BCE. Several major kingdoms rose and contended for survival, among them Qin, Zhao, Yan, Wei, Han, Chu and Qi. None could fully rest. Every border was a question, every alliance temporary, and every quiet season shadowed by the possibility of marching feet. Though later memory would focus on emperors and grand designs, the first lines of defence were far more scattered. Different states raised earthen ramparts, watchposts, and boundary walls where danger seemed most likely to arrive. These were not yet one continuous barrier. They were local answers to local fears, practical structures shaped by terrain, labour, and the uneasy knowledge that neighbouring powers were always measuring the horizon. Chapter 2. The Young King of Qin. In the western lands of ancient China, the state of Qin had already become known for stern laws, ordered fields, and armies that moved with quiet precision. Into this disciplined world came Ying Zheng, a boy born not into peace, but into a time of rival kingdoms, uneasy borders, and constant watchfulness. Around him, the court breathed ambition, and the future waited in silence. Chapter 2. The Young King of Qin, Ying Zheng, was born in 259 BCE during the final centuries of the Zhou world, when old royal authority had faded and powerful states struggled for supremacy. His father would later become King Zhuangshang of Qin. But the boy's earliest years unfolded amid uncertainty and political tension. Even before he could understand the shape of power, power had already begun shaping the path beneath his feet. Chapter 2. The Young King of Qin. The kingdom he would inherit had not risen by chance. Qin had been transformed over generations, especially through reforms associated with Xiangyang in the 4th century BCE. These measures rewarded military merit, strengthened state control, and bound households more tightly to service and production. What grew from those laws was a state severe to many, yet undeniably strong, patient, and increasingly difficult for rivals to resist. Chapter 2. The Young King of Qin. Far to the east, other states still cherished older aristocratic customs, courtly refinement, and the prestige of ancient lineages. Qin, by contrast, was often regarded as harsh, practical, and unadorned. Yet this very difference became a source of power. While others leaned on inherited rank, Qin placed value on obedience, agriculture, administration, and battlefield achievement. It was a world where order mattered more. Chapter 2. The Young King of Qin. When Ying Zheng came to the throne in 246 BCE, he was still very young, only a boy in a realm surrounded by danger. A child might wear the crown, but enemies would not soften their intentions. The title of king carried weight beyond ceremony. It meant becoming the still point inside a restless machine, a machine of ministers, generals, messengers, granaries, roads, and sharpened plans stretching toward every border. Chapter 2. The Young King of Qin. In those early years, government did not rest fully in the young ruler's hands. Powerful adults managed affairs of state, as often happened when a sovereign was still growing. Historians speak especially of the Chancellor Liu Bui, whose influence at court was great. Around the young king stood advisors, servants, relatives and rivals, all close enough to guide him, and close enough to guide him, and close enough to threaten him if... Chapter 2. The Young King of Qin. One can imagine the palace at Shanyang in careful layers of movement and restraint. Officials entered in ordered ranks. Couriers arrived with reports from distant commanderies. Scribes bent over bamboo slips, preserving commands and calculations. Armour glinted in courtyards where discipline was rehearsed as faithfully as ritual. For a young ruler, such halls must have seemed both shelter and burden, magnificent in form, yet crowded with expectation. Chapter 2. The Young King of Qin. Beyond the palace walls, Qin's strength rested on systems rather than dreams. Land was cultivated with state interest in mind. Households were registered and counted. Service, tax and command moved through organised channels. Roads and supply lines mattered as much as swords. This practical foundation gave Qin a steadiness that others feared. In quiet ledgers and measured fields, the kingdom gathered the resources that would one day support astonishing conquest. Chapter 2. The Young King of Qin. Its armies, too, reflected this spirit of order. Advancement could come through merit in war rather than noble birth alone, and that policy gave many men a fierce reason to serve. Generals relied on coordination, logistics and obedience, not merely courage. To neighbouring courage, Qin seemed relentless because it had learned to turn administration into force. Every storehouse, every tally, every drilled formation. Chapter 2. The Young King of Qin. Yet for all this strength, the world around Yingzheng remained deeply unstable. The Warring States period was nearing its final phase, but peace was nowhere in sight. Han, Zhao, Wei, Chu, Yan and Qi still held their own lands, ambitions and fears. Alliances shifted. Envoys negotiated. Armies watched one another from fortified borders. Chapter 2. The Young King of Qin. As he matured, Yingzheng did not remain a distant child hidden behind ceremonial screens. He gradually moved toward direct rule, and with that movement came danger from within the court itself. Ancient kingdoms were often threatened not only by hostile neighbours, but by factions close to the throne. Trust was precious, and suspicion could become a habit. A ruler who wished to survive needed calm judgment, and the will to act decisively. Chapter 2. The Young King of Qin. One major crisis arose in connection with Lao Ai, a court figure whose relationship to the royal household became politically explosive. In 238 BCE, during Yingzheng's early reign, Lao Ai led a revolt that threatened the centre of Qin power. The uprising failed, and the response was severe. For the young king, this was more than a victory over intrigue. It was a lesson written in fear. Authority had to be secured personally. Chapter 2. The Young King of Qin. After suppressing that rebellion, Yingzheng strengthened his own position and reduced the influence of those who had overshadowed him. The transition from boy king to active ruler became clearer. Power was no longer something arranged around him by others. It was something he began to hold, test and direct. In the stillness that follows danger, perhaps he saw more plainly the scale of the task before him. Chapter 2. The Young King of Qin. The vision forming in his reign did not emerge from impulse alone. Qin's leaders had long imagined expansion, and many believed that only unification could end the endless cycle of war. Yingzheng inherited not merely armies and ministers, but an idea that the fractured world could be brought under a single authority. It was a vast and perilous dream, one that required patience, discipline, and a ruler prepared to think beyond customary limits. Chapter 2. The Young King of Qin. In later years, he would become famous under the name Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor. But in this earlier chapter of his life, that future title had not yet hardened around him. He was still a king among rival kings, still measuring the landscape, still learning what fear could do to men and what order could do to states. Greatness, at this stage, was only a possibility, quiet, distant, and slowly taking shape. Chapter 2. The Young King of Qin. There is something almost hushed in the contrast between his youth and the machinery of Qin. A single young life moved within systems built by generations of lawmakers, labourers, officers and rulers. The kingdom did not wait for sentiment. It expected competence. It rewarded results. In such a place, childhood could not remain untouched for long. The boy at the centre of court life was being pressed, day by day, into the hard outline of Chapter 2. The Young King of Qin. We may picture evenings in the capital when reports arrived from frontier garrisons and distant fields, each message carrying its own burden. Grain levels, troop numbers, road conditions, diplomatic movements, all these mattered in a state that lived by preparation. To govern Qin was to listen constantly to the pulse of systems. For Yingzheng, learning to rule meant learning to hear that pulse clearly, and to sense where strength could still be pulsed clearly, and to sense where strength could still be deepened. Chapter 2. The Young King of Qin. The other kingdoms watched Qin with reason for concern. Its reforms had given it endurance, and its rulers had shown increasing ambition. Still, none could fully know how far the young king's intentions would someday reach. Perhaps even within Qin, few yet saw the full horizon. Ambition often gathers softly before it declares itself. It begins in habits of control, in faith in institutions, in the repeated belief. Chapter 2. The Young King of Qin. While later memory often lingers on conquest, walls and empire, this earlier moment deserves its own quiet attention. Before the vast campaigns, there was formation. Before empire, there was discipline. Before the emperor's title, there was a ruler learning how unstable the world could be. The foundations of his later achievements and terrors were not sudden. They were laid gradually in court struggles, administrative habits. Chapter 2. The Young King of Qin. Qin's political culture could be unforgiving, yet it offered clarity. Service had purpose. Rank could be earned. Commands travelled through defined channels. Punishments were harsh, but expectations were unmistakable. This strict coherence helped the kingdom function with unusual efficiency for its time. For Yingzheng, raised within such a system, rule may have appeared not as a delicate balance of competing customs, but as the first. Chapter 2. The Young King of Qin. As seasons turned, the young king's world grew larger without becoming gentler. Court ceremony, military readiness, internal suspicion and frontier calculation all flowed together into a single education. He was learning not from scrolls alone, but from pressure. Every threat demanded interpretation. Every alliance contained uncertainty. Every alliance contained uncertainty. Every success invited further risk. Chapter 2. The Young King of Qin. To many living then, the old Zhou order must have felt like a fading memory, beautiful perhaps, but powerless to restore peace. New forms of rule were emerging, and Qin stood at their sharpest edge. Yingzheng was both heir to that transformation and agent of its next stage. His youth did not soften history. Instead, history gathered around him, asking whether one ruler could finally impose lasting shape on a broken political world. Chapter 2. The Young King of Qin. The burden he carried was therefore larger than a throne. It was the burden of possibility. If Qin remained merely one strong state among many, the wars would continue as they had for generations. If Qin prevailed completely, the map itself would change. Somewhere within the young ruler, calculation and imagination began to meet. In that meeting, the future empire existed first as a thought, disciplined, immense and not yet finished. Chapter 2. The Young King of Qin. So we leave him here for now, not yet emperor, not yet the builder of grand defences and sweeping commands, but a young sovereign in a hard western kingdom, gathering resolve. Around him stand ministers, soldiers, laws and restless borders. Ahead lies unification, glory, fear, and the colossal works that would mark his name forever. For the moment, though, all of it rests in preparation, in silence before the moment, though all of it rests in preparation. Chapter 3. A realm drawn into one. Across the warring states, old borders still held like fading threads, yet Qin moved with patient force. Under Yingzheng, campaigns unfolded not as sudden storms, but as a steady narrowing of distance. One by one, rival courts that had long stood apart felt the reach of the Western Kingdom drawing closer, until the map itself seemed to lean toward a single centre. Chapter 3. A Realm Drawn into One. Han fell first in 230 BCE, a smaller state pressed by Qin's strength and unable to resist for long. Its surrender marked more than a military event. It showed that the long age of divided rule was weakening. For those who watched from neighbouring courts, the message was quiet but unmistakable. The power rising in Qin was no longer a distant concern, but an approaching certainty. Chapter 3. A Realm Drawn into One. After Han came Zhao, conquered in 228 BCE after years of struggle and strain. Zhao had once been formidable, shaped by hardy lands and seasoned armies, yet exhaustion and earlier defeats had thinned its defences. Qin did not merely strike a blow, it continued a long pressure, wearing down resistance until another separate world, with its own memories and rulers, was folded into the widening body of empire. Chapter 3. A Realm Drawn into One. In 225 BCE, Wei was overcome. Its capital, Daliang, was taken after Qin forces diverted the waters of the Yellow River and the Hong Canal against the city. Even in this, there was something grimly methodical. The conquest was not only about armies meeting in battle, it was about using the land itself to break what had stood apart, turning river and earth into instruments of unification. Chapter 3. A Realm Drawn into One. Chu, vast and ancient, required greater effort. Qin suffered setbacks before regathering its strength, and in 223 BCE, the state was finally defeated. For centuries, Chu had carried its own customs, songs, and sense of grandeur. Its fall was not the silencing of a single city, but the dimming of an entire regional world. As Chu yielded, the dream of one ruler over all under heaven drew nearer. Chapter 3. A Realm Drawn into One. Yan, in the northeast, had already shown its fear through desperation. Years earlier, its court had backed the failed assassination attempt against Yingzheng by Jing Ke. Yet fear could not halt Qin expansion. In 222 BCE, Yan was conquered. The northern roads that once led to an anxious frontier now pointed inward instead, toward a realm that was steadily gathering every horizon instead. Toward a realm that was steadily gathering every horizon. Chapter 4. The First Emperor's New Order. With the realm at last gathered beneath one throne, Qin Shi Huang turned from conquest to arrangement. Victory on the battlefield was only the beginning. Now he sought a different triumph, to make distant valleys, river towns, and guarded passes answer to one design. In the hush after war, clerks, surveyors, and officials began their patient work, carrying the Emperor's will across the newly joined land. Chapter 4. The First Emperor's New Order. For generations, the old kingdoms had measured life in their own ways. Wheels fit different roads, merchants counted by different scales, and written marks could shift from one border to the next. Such variety had once belonged to a divided age. To the Emperor, it also carried danger, confusion, delay, and the lingering memory of many rival courts beneath a sky he wanted ruled as one. Chapter 4. The First Emperor's New Order. Among the most practical changes was the standard width for cart axles. It sounds small, almost humble, beside armies and palaces. Yet this quiet rule could shape the movement of a whole empire. When wheels matched the same ruts, roads became more reliable paths for grain, messages, soldiers, and tax goods. Order settled not only in laws, but in the grooves cut gently through the earth. Chapter 4. The First Emperor's New Order. Roads themselves stretched outward with new purpose. From the imperial centre, routes linked commanderies, borders, and watchful outposts. These were not merely paths for travel. They were channels of power, carrying decrees from the throne and reports back again. Along them moved officials with tablets, labourers with tools, and mounted couriers riding hard through dust. In this network, the empire learned to feel the pulse of its own vast body. Chapter 4. The First Emperor's New Order. Standard weights and measures followed close behind. In markets and storehouses, fairness had long depended on local custom, and custom varied from place to place. The Emperor's government wanted certainty instead. A measured grain basket in one district should mean the same in another. A merchant crossing the realm would meet familiar balances, familiar volumes, familiar rules. Through such ordinary objects, distant communities. Chapter 4. The First Emperor's New Order. There was a kind of strange peace in these reforms. A ruler often remembered for force also relied on repetition, uniformity, and careful record. Officials checked standards, inspected roads, and copied regulations with disciplined hands. To govern a huge territory, the court needed more than fear. It needed legibility, signs, measures, and routes that could be read the same way from province to province, like a single pattern. Chapter 4. The First Emperor's New Order. Writing held special importance in this grand effort. Before unification, scripts differed across the former states, shaped by local tradition and political separation. Under Qin rule, the court promoted a more unified written form, often associated with the small seal script used in official life. This did not erase every local habit at once, but it gave administration a clearer shared language, allowing orders and records to travel with less uncertainty. Chapter 4. The First Emperor's New Order. Imagine a magistrate in a far commandery receiving an order from the capital. The words on the strip or tablet needed to be recognized, copied, and enforced without endless dispute over their form. Script then became more than artful mark-making. It became a tool of connection. Each stroke served the dream that one command, issued once, might reach mountains, plains, and river settlements with nearly the same meaning everywhere. Chapter 4. The First Emperor's New Order. Such uniformity made the empire easier to govern, but it also changed how people moved through daily life. Carters adjusted to roads shaped by common standards. Traders adapted to official measures. Scribes learned forms approved by authority. Even ordinary exchanges slowly entered the rhythm of central rule. The emperor's hand was not present in person, yet its presence could be felt in wheel tracks, market scales. Chapter 4. The First Emperor's New Order. To many at court, these reforms must have seemed elegant in their logic. If the world had once been fractured, then sameness could heal fracture. If rival states had lived by separate habits, then common standards could prevent their return. The empire became, in a sense, easier to read. Distances remained immense, peoples remained many, yet officials increasingly worked within one coordinated frame, measured, recorded, and directed from the centre. Chapter 4. The First Emperor's New Order. But calm order often carries another feeling beneath it. The need to standardize everything suggests a fear of what happens when things are left uneven. The emperor had risen from an age of war, and he knew how quickly difference could harden into division. Behind each practical reform stood an anxious question. If the land stopped obeying the same rules, would the old chaos begin to breathe again? Chapter 4. The First Emperor's New Order. This is where administration becomes almost intimate. A state reveals its deepest worries not only through battles, but through what it insists on counting, aligning, and correcting. Axles must match, measures must agree, characters must conform, roads must lead where command requires. Each rule promises stability, yet each also whispers of distrust. Chapter 4. The First Emperor's New Order. Roads carried more than goods and messages. They also carried expectations. Faster travel meant swifter inspection and quicker response from the state. A governor could be checked, a border report delivered, a levy coordinated with greater speed than before. For the throne, this was strength. For those living under it, the nearness of authority might feel less comforting. The empire's reach had lengthened, and with it came a sharper sense of being known. Chapter 4. The First Emperor's New Order, standardization then, was never simply mechanical. It gathered symbolic power. To use the same measures, to read approved forms, to move along common roads, all this taught people to inhabit one political world. The old states survived in memory, accent, and local habit, but the court pressed steadily toward a new identity. Unity was no longer only a military achievement. It was becoming an experience repeated. Chapter 4. The First Emperor's New Order. In sleepier moments of history, rulers inherit systems already settled. Qin Shi Huang did not. He ruled a realm assembled by force and still vulnerable to fracture. That helps explain the intensity of these reforms. They were not decorative achievements, but foundations. Without them, conquest might remain only recent violence. With them, the court hoped victory could harden into permanence. Stone, road, script and Chapter 4. The First Emperor's New Order. There is something almost meditative in imagining scribes copying standardized forms by lamplight, inspectors comparing official weights, and workers smoothing roads that led back toward the capital. Repetition was the method. The same sign, the same width, the same count, again and again. Through such routines, the empire attempted to quiet unpredictability. Administration became a kind of Chapter 4. The First Emperor's New Order. Yet no system, however carefully planned, removes the human burden of carrying it out. Standards had to be enforced by people, by officials under pressure, by labourers assigned to difficult works, by communities asked to adapt. The tranquility of uniform rules could rest upon exhausting effort. Beneath the neat arrangement of empire lay countless acts of compliance, correction and strain. The order was real. Chapter 4. The First Emperor's New Order. Historians often note how remarkable these reforms were in their scope. To standardize so much across such a broad domain required unusual determination and a disciplined bureaucracy. The achievement was not abstract. It altered transport, taxation, communication, and state supervision in tangible ways. Even now, the idea of binding diversity. Chapter 4. The First Emperor's New Order. And still, as the roads lengthen and the measures settle into place, a shadow remains beside the calm. The more tightly a ruler arranges the world, the more he may fear whatever resists arrangement. Every unified script implies unreadable margins. Every standard road suggests territories not yet fully secured. Administration can soothe, but it can also sharpen vigilance. In this ordered realm, Chapter 4. The First Emperor's New Order. Perhaps that is why this chapter feels both grand and quiet. There are no charging armies here, no sudden clash of banners. Instead, we move through subtler instruments of power, wheels aligned to roads, weights matched to decree, written forms disciplined into consistency. Yet these calm details shape history just as surely as battle. Empires endure not only through conquest, but through the repeated habits that make distant places answer to one center. Chapter 4. The First Emperor's New Order. For those living in the empire, the changes may have arrived unevenly, gradually, and then all at once. A trader notices a new standard at market. A courier rides a better road. A clerk adopts official characters. Piece by piece, the world becomes more regular. Such regularity can feel reassuring. It can also feel narrowing. As the emperor's order deepens, the space for difference begins to shrink beneath its measured and watchful calm. Chapter 5. Whispers from the northern frontier. Far from the ordered roads and watchful courts of Qin, the land opened into long, cold plains. Here, the empire met distance, wind, and uncertainty. Beyond the settled fields, riders moved across the grasslands with a freedom the court could not easily measure. In later histories, these northern pressures are often linked to the Xiongnu, though the full picture remains faint, scattered like ash across time. Scattered like ash across time. Chapter 5. Whispers from the northern frontier. Along this exposed edge, frontier garrisons stood in lonely silence. Soldiers kept watch where farmland thinned and the air sharpened. Their forts were simple places of timber, packed earth and routine. By day, they scanned the horizon. By night, they listened to the restless dark. In such places, the empire felt less like a certainty and more like a fragile line held against the unknown. Chapter 5. Whispers from the northern frontier. The Qin court understood that danger did not always arrive in great armies. Sometimes it came as swift raids, vanished tracks, and rumours carried south by frightened travellers. Herds disappeared. Outposts sent uneasy reports. Messengers arrived dusty and tired, speaking of movement beyond the border. Each account was partial, yet together they formed a pattern that disturbed the emperor and deepened his belief. Chapter 6. The Impossible War Begins. In the north, Qin Shi Huang ordered something vast beyond ordinary measure. Not the latest stone wall known today, but older frontier barriers joined, extended and strengthened. Across ridges, valleys and dry open lands, earlier walls of earth were gathered into a longer line. Under commanders such as Meng Tian, the Empire turned its strength toward the horizon, where defence and ambition slowly became one immense undertaking. Chapter 6. The Impossible Wall begins. The familiar Great Wall of postcards and travel books belonged to later centuries. In the Qin Age, many defences were built from tamped earth, packed layer upon layer between wooden frames, until the ground itself seemed to rise into ramparts. These were practical walls, stern and weathered, shaped from local soil and labour. Even so, their scale was astonishing, stretching across difficult country where distance itself felt like an enemy. Chapter 6. The Impossible Wall begins. Qin rulers inherited older border walls from rival states that had defended themselves long before unification. What the first emperor demanded was connection, a tightening of scattered defences into a broader northern shield. This was not one single unbroken construction begun from nothing, but a huge campaign of linking, repairing, extending and reinforcing. In that distinction, the story becomes more human, and in Chapter 6, The Impossible Wall begins. Historians often connect this northern effort with General Meng Tian, a trusted commander sent to confront threats beyond the frontier. His role brings the wall out of legend and into administration, movement and command. Orders had to travel, routes had to be surveyed, supplies had to be gathered, and workers had to be driven onward. Behind the image of a wall rising against the sky stood an empire of lists, burdens and relentless coordination. Chapter 6. The Impossible Wall begins. To hear that a wall was built is simple. To imagine the labour is something else entirely. Soldiers marched not only to fight but to haul and guard. Conscripted farmers left villages and fields behind. Prisoners were sent where punishment and utility met. Together they moved earth, timber, brush and stone through landscapes that offered little comfort. The work was not a single act, but a season after season after season of exhaustion. Chapter 6. The Impossible Wall begins. In some places, men cut into hillsides and packed soil into frames until layers hardened like rough clay rock. In other places, they carried material upward by hand, basket, sled and shoulder. Timber supports had to be found and shaped. Paths had to be opened where almost no path existed before. Each section demanded its own answer from the land. The wall was never separate from terrain. It was forced slowly out of it. Chapter 6. The Impossible Wall begins. Mountain ridges made every task heavier. A load that seemed manageable on level ground became punishing on a narrow ascent. Wind pressed against the body. Dust settled into the mouth. Cold arrived early and lingered. Yet the lines of labour kept moving upward, step by step, carrying the empire onto the spine of the landscape. From afar, the workers must have looked like small drifting threads, sewing a harsh border across the heights. Chapter 6. The Impossible Wall begins. Beyond the mountains lay stretches of dry plain where the problem changed but never softened. There, distance widened and supplies had to cross long empty reaches. Water mattered constantly. Food had to be measured, guarded and delivered. Earth for tamping might be near, but hands were still required to lift, pour, strike and compress it into form. Under the calm sky of the north, labour. Chapter 6. The Impossible Wall begins. Tamped earth was an ancient method, plain in description yet demanding in practice. Soil was layered between boards, then pounded again and again until it grew dense and hard. The rhythm must have filled the air for miles. Lift, pour, strike, compact, then begin again. Such building did not glitter, and it left no polished surface. But it could endure, especially in dry regions, carrying the weight of empire inside. Chapter 6. The Impossible Wall begins. There is a temptation to picture the project only as a masterpiece of will. But calm history leaves room for weariness. Bodies weakened. Journeys lengthened. Homes receded into memory. For many who worked there, the wall was not an emblem first. It was a task that consumed the day and returned with dawn. The emperor may have seen security and grandeur, yet the labourer likely saw soil. Chapter 6. The Impossible Wall begins. Soldiers on the works occupied a strange space between builder and guard. They protected routes, enforced order, and added their own strength to the labour. Their presence reminds us that this was a military frontier as much as an engineering one. The wall belonged to fear of attack, to strategy, to the need to watch movement across the north. Even while being built, it was already part fortification, part warning, part statement of imperial reach. Chapter 6. The Impossible Wall begins. Conscripted workers carried a different burden. Many were ordinary people summoned by the state, drawn away from planting, harvest, and family obligations. Their names rarely survive, yet their absence must have been felt in countless villages. Empty places at meals, unfinished work in fields, the quiet knowledge that distant commands could remake local life in an instant. The wall rose from northern soil, but also from Chapter 6. The Impossible Wall begins. Prisoners too were folded into the immense undertaking, their punishment transformed into labour at the edge of the empire. In stories told later, this image grew especially dark, and some accounts became larger than evidence can firmly prove. Still, the broad truth remains clear. Coercion stood close beside construction. The wall was not built by free admiration alone. It emerged from Chapter 6. The Impossible Wall begins. What makes the work feel almost dreamlike is its scale against the smallness of each action. One basket of soil, one timber dragged forward, one slope climbed, one layer packed into place. No single movement seems equal to the legend. Yet the legend is exactly what accumulates from such motions, multiplied beyond counting. In this way, the wall begins less as a monument than as endless effort, repeated until the land itself appears. Chapter 6. The Impossible Wall begins. We should imagine no smooth, uniform ribbon advancing perfectly across China. The northern defences of the Qin world were uneven, adaptive, and tied to specific needs of terrain and threat. Some stretches were repaired, some were extended, others linked older fortifications into a broader system. The result was immense without being simple. That complexity matters because it replaces myth with something more real, an empire solving problem. Chapter 6. The Impossible Wall begins. Messages moved between officials, commanders, and work crews, carrying demands from distant centres of power. Measurements were taken, quotas enforced, progress noted. Bureaucracy travelled with the wall as surely as baskets and tools did. This too was part of Qin rule, the belief that vast territory could be ordered through clear command and strict obedience. The frontier was far away, yet the emperor's will reached it through documents. Chapter 6. The Impossible Wall begins. At night, when tools fell quiet, the unfinished lines of earth must have rested under stars that seemed older than any dynasty. Fires flickered. Wind moved along the ridges. Somewhere beyond the frontier, unseen peoples watched the same dark sky. In such moments, the war may have felt less like certainty than like a question asked against the vastness. Can an empire really hold the horizon by raising earth against it? Chapter 6. The Impossible Wall begins. The answer, of course, was never complete. Walls can slow movement, guide defence, and define space, but they cannot end human uncertainty. Even so, rulers build them because boundaries offer a sense of form against fear. For Qin Shi Huang, the northern works expressed vigilance made visible. They told subjects that the state was powerful, active, and alert. They told outsiders that the empire intended to harden it. Chapter 6. The Impossible Wall begins. Yet within that message of strength lay strain. Every extension required grain, tools, transport, supervision, and more hands. Resources pulled northward had to come from somewhere. The wall was a defence, but also a demand that rippled through the empire's interior. Calmly considered, its grandeur cannot be separated from cost. The more impossible the achievement appears, the more we sense the pressure placed on the people who made it. Chapter 6. The Impossible Wall begins. This is why the chapter lingers not only on the emperor's vision, but on movement itself. Feet on hard ground, shoulders beneath weight, tools rising and falling, lines of people crossing barren space with no audience except the sky. The wall did not appear all at once. It advanced in fragments, sections, repairs, and joined lengths. To live inside that process would have meant feeling time stretch until labour seemed as endless as. Chapter 6. The Impossible Wall begins. In later memory, the Great Wall became a single symbol, clear and monumental. But in the Qin moment, it was rawer than memory allows. Fresh earth, rough edges, temporary structures, scattered camps, and unfinished passages would have defined much of what people actually saw. The famous image came later. Here, in its beginning, the wall was still becoming itself, uncertain in form, yet already immense enough to impress. Chapter 6. The Impossible Wall begins. To call the project impossible is not to say it was unreal. It is to recognise the gap between ordinary human scale and imperial demand. Most lives are measured by family, season and village. This work answered another measure entirely: dynasty, frontier, permanence, fear. That is why it feels both historical and dreamlike. A command was given, and thousands of separate lives were drawn into a shape so large that no one... Chapter 7. Ambition, Silence, and the Weight of Stone. Along the far ridgelines, the wall continued like a long thought that refused to rest. It guarded borders, yet it also revealed the shape of one man's fear. Qin Shi Huang had joined divided kingdoms beneath a single rule, but unity carried a severe price. Orders moved outward from the throne, and countless weary hands answered them in dust, wind, and aching silence. Chapter 7. Ambition, Silence, and the Weight of Stone. The Emperor's will seemed vast enough to cross mountains. Roads were laid, measures were standardized, and rival powers were subdued beneath a single authority. Yet the same force that brought order also demanded obedience without softness. Labourers climbed harsh slopes with timber, stone, and earth, while the Empire's command reached them from far away, heavier than armour, quieter. Chapter 8. The Emperor Who Feared Time. In his later years, Qin Shi Huang ruled a vast empire stitched together by roads, laws, and watchful officials. Yet, as his power widened across the land, another feeling seemed to deepen within him, a quiet fear that no command could silence. The emperor who had subdued rival kings now faced a force beyond armies or walls, the steady passing of time itself. Chapter 8. The Emperor Who Feared Time. From the capital, messages travelled swiftly along the imperial roads, carrying orders to distant mountains, river valleys and guarded frontiers. Everything appeared arranged beneath his authority. Still, age moved inward with a patience no messenger could outpace. In the stillness of court evenings, among lamps and polished stone, thoughts of endings may have lingered beside the ruler who demanded permanence from an impermanent world. Chapter 8. The Emperor Who Feared Time. Ancient sources describe Qin Shi Huang becoming increasingly concerned with immortality as he grew older. In early China, beliefs about long life, hidden islands, and rare elixirs were already circulating among nobles and seekers. The emperor listened closely to such promises. To a man who had unified kingdoms and reordered the map, the thought of escaping death may have seemed not impossible, only undiscovered. Chapter 8. The Emperor Who Feared Time. Court advisors, magicians, and fangshi, learned specialists in techniques of divination and transcendence, found space within this atmosphere of desire and dread. Some offered rituals. Some spoke of sacred mountains and substances that might preserve life. Others claimed knowledge of distant realms beyond ordinary reach. Whether sincere or opportunistic, they moved through the palace world where hope... Chapter 8. The Emperor Who Feared Time. One of the best-known stories concerns Xu Fu, who was sent eastward in search of the fabled Isles of the Immortals. Later accounts describe ships, attendants, and a journey toward lands beyond the sea. Historians treat parts of the tale cautiously, yet the tradition endures because it reflects something unmistakable: the emperor's readiness to send men far beyond the horizon in pursuit of more years. Chapter 8. The Emperor Who Feared Time. The search for life without end was not merely a private worry hidden in quiet chambers. It became part of governance itself. Imperial resources, labour and attention could be drawn toward the possibility of preservation. In this way, personal fear touched public power. Across the empire, roads were measured, walls were watched, taxes were collected, and somewhere behind these systems, the emperor continued reaching for one more tomorrow. Chapter 8. The Emperor Who Feared Time. Qin Shi Huang also travelled widely through his empire, making a series of inspection tours recorded in early histories. These journeys displayed strength, order, and presence. They allowed the ruler to be seen across the lands he had joined. but they may also suggest restlessness, a need to move through the territory he had mastered, as though certainty might be found on the road more easily than at home. Chapter 8. The Emperor Who Feared Time. Imagine the long imperial procession passing under changing skies, chariots, horses, attendants, officials and guards moving along roads built by command. Villages waited. Mountains opened and closed around the route. Rivers reflected the banners in broken light. At each stop the empire could witness its sovereign. Yet within the ordered movement of this grand display, one question remained unmoved. Chapter 8. The Emperor Who Feared Time. During these tours, the emperor visited sacred places and ordered inscriptions carved on stone. These texts celebrated unification, law, and the reach of imperial authority. They were meant to endure in the landscape itself, speaking long after voices had faded. There is something deeply human in that gesture, to write oneself into cliffs and mountains, hoping stone may keep what flesh cannot hold for very long. Chapter 8. The Emperor Who Feared Time. The more the empire was organized, the more its ruler may have felt the fragility beneath organization. Commands could standardize weights, writing and roads, but not the body. Decrees could bind officials to service, but not bind breath to remain. In such contrast lies the sadness of these later years. A man surrounded by proofs of obedience, discovering that time offers no obedience at all. Chapter 8. The Emperor Who Feared Time. Some accounts suggest the emperor became suspicious and withdrawn, wary of plots and hidden dangers. Ancient histories, especially those written after his dynasty fell, must be read carefully. Yet fear at the centre of absolute rule is hardly difficult to imagine. When so much depends on one life, every whisper matters. Hallways lengthen, doors seem slower to open, trust grows thinner, even within circles. Chapter 8. The Emperor Who Feared Time. Palace life in his final period may have been full of movement without calm. Documents arriving, servants kneeling, advisors waiting, guards posted through the night. Stillness existed, but perhaps only in fragments. A lamp burning beside bamboo slips. Footsteps fading into a corridor. Wind against shutters. In such moments, power itself can feel strangely narrow. Chapter 8. The Emperor Who Feared Time. Traditions about elixirs of immortality often carry an irony that is difficult to ignore. Some substances later associated with such efforts, including mercury compounds, were dangerous rather than preserving. Sources do not always allow certainty in every detail, but the broader image remains haunting, the search for safety through remedies that may have carried their own harm. Fear, when it guides judgment, can make danger. Chapter 8. The Emperor Who Feared Time. Beyond the legends and later retellings, there is a quieter truth worth resting with. Aging reduces even the grandest life into smaller circles of concern. What once seemed distant arrives at the door. For Qin Shi Huang, the world had become measurable in roads, districts and fortifications. Yet the deepest measure before him was simpler, the shortening distance between the present hour and the unknown silence beyond it. Chapter 8. The Emperor Who Feared Time. His great projects remained all around him, the frontier defences in the north, the linked pathways of administration, the system of command radiating from the centre. These works suggested continuity. They implied that order could continue after any storm. And yet the creator of that order could not rest inside its promise. To build permanence for a state is one thing. To feel permanence for a state is one thing. To feel permanence. Chapter 8. The Emperor Who Feared Time. On the road, perhaps, he found temporary relief. Travel creates the illusion that movement is progress against all anxieties. New landscapes distract the mind. A ridge appears, then vanishes. Dawn becomes afternoon. Camps are raised and folded away. But night returns wherever one goes. So too did the Emperor's concern, travelling with him from plain to mountain, from palace. Chapter 8. The Emperor Who Feared Time. The same ruler who had sought to master distance now encountered the strange intimacy of mortality. Death was no longer an abstraction for defeated rivals or forgotten ancestors. It was personal, patient and near. This may be why these years feel so hushed in memory. Beneath the proclamations and ceremonies, one can almost sense a man listening inward, hearing the soft approach of something no wall was ever meant to stop. Chapter 8. The Emperor Who Feared Time. Sleep and power are uneasy companions. A sovereign must rest, yet rest requires surrender, if only for a little while. For someone burdened by suspicion and longing for control, even the coming of night may have felt like a kind of yielding. Eyes close, guards remain, lamps dim, the Empire continues breathing in darkness. And somewhere within that darkness, the Emperor must have known dawn was never guaranteed. Chapter 8. The Emperor Who Feared Time. There is a tenderness in viewing his final years without spectacle. Not to excuse the harshness of his rule, and not to romanticize suffering, but to notice the ancient human core beneath imperial ceremony. Fear of time belongs to conquerors and farmers alike. It visits courts and huts with the same quiet step. In that sense, the first emperor stands closer to ordinary lives than his titles would ever suggest. Chapter 8. The Emperor Who Feared Time. Early Chinese political thought often connected good order with harmony between heaven, earth, and human conduct. A ruler could command officials, but heavenly patterns lay beyond command. This older understanding gives the chapter a deeper sadness. The emperor may have aligned roads and laws across his realm, yet the larger order of existence remained vast and indifferent, moving by rhythms no decree could alter or delay. Chapter 8. The Emperor Who Feared Time. As listeners moving through this memory, we can picture moonlight crossing palace stone, touching thresholds worn by countless steps. The halls are full, yet loneliness hangs within them. Servants wait for instructions. Ministers wait for favour. The night waits for nothing. Outside, roads disappear into the dark provinces of the empire. Inside, a single life narrows toward its final horizon, surrounded by silence. Chapter 8. The Emperor Who Feared Time. His later journeys ended, as all journeys do, not in revelation, but in exhaustion. The body has its own accounting, and no title can revise it. The emperor had sought hidden islands, protective medicines, sacred places, and enduring monuments. Yet none of these could answer the oldest question in the way he wished. They could only circle it, like attendants standing respectfully outside a chamber they cannot enter. Chapter 8. The Emperor Who Feared Time. What remains most vivid is not only the ambition of his reign, but the narrowing that followed ambition. The wider his empire became, the more enclosed his inward life may have felt. Roads stretched farther, walls extended longer, orders reached deeper into the provinces. Still, the space available to certainty grew small. In that quiet contradiction, the final image of the emperor begins to form. Powerful. Chapter 8. The Emperor Who Feared Time. So this chapter closes not with thunder, but with a hush. Qin Shi Huang, builder of systems and seeker of permanence, moved through his last years surrounded by evidence of command. Yet time remained unconquered. In the end, that may be the softest truth history offers here, that even the mightiest ruler can line the earth with roads and still find no path beyond the boundary. All human lives must meet. Chapter 9. After the First Emperor. In 210 BCE, Qin Shi Huang died far from the capital while travelling across his empire. His rule had seemed immovable, as if stone and law might hold the world forever in place. Yet death entered quietly, as it always does. Behind the grand commands and watchful armies, the empire already carried deep strain. What had been forced tightly together would soon begin, almost at once, to loosen. Chapter 9. After the First Emperor. His ministers tried to control the news, fearing what might happen if the empire learned too soon that its ruler was gone. The court moved with caution and secrecy, carrying grief, fear, and calculation together. But concentrated power is often most fragile at its centre. When one will had shaped everything, its absence left not calm order, but uncertainty spreading outward like a faint crack through winter ice. Chapter 9. After the First Emperor. Qin Shi Huang had bound vast regions through law, punishment, roads and labour. He had standardized weights, measures and writing, giving the realm a shared structure. Yet unity built by severity asked much from ordinary lives. Taxes were heavy, work was relentless, families were drawn into projects larger than themselves. After the emperor's death, these burdens did not disappear. Instead, they became harder to bear beneath weaker hands. Chapter 10. The Long Line Beneath the Stars. Long after Qin Shi Huang was gone, the walls did not vanish from history. Later dynasties repaired old embankments, raised new barriers, and shifted their lines with changing needs. Earth, tamped hard by ancient hands, gave way in places to brick and stone. Across centuries, frontier defences became a layered inheritance. Not one wall from one ruler, but many long answers to recurring fear and distance. Chapter 10. The Long Line Beneath the Stars. The Han dynasty extended frontier walls farther into the north and west, guarding roads, garrisons and trade routes that linked China to Central Asia. Later periods saw neglect, rebuilding and change. Some stretches crumbled back into the land, others were revived when danger returned. The story of the wall was never still. It moved with politics, climate, war migration and the patient pressure of time itself. Chapter 10. The Long Line Beneath the Stars. Centuries passed, and each age understood the frontier in its own way. Some rulers trusted diplomacy, tribute and marriage alliances more than ramparts. Others believed security had to be drawn across ridges and deserts in earth and timber. The wall was never a single unbroken line made once and forever. It was a practice of border making, interrupted, resumed and reshaped by the needs of each new dynasty. Chapter 10. The Long Line Beneath the Stars. Much of what travellers recognise today belongs to later rebuilding, especially under the Ming dynasty, when strong brick walls, towers and passes were raised or reinforced on a vast scale. These surviving sections often define the wall in modern memory. Yet behind their stone faces lies a deeper past. Older lines, older labour, older imperial fears, stretching back through weathered centuries toward the first unifying empire. Chapter 10. The Long Line Beneath the Stars. This is where Qin Shi Huang must be placed with care. He did not build every mountain wall later generations would see. He was not the maker of all stone battlements remembered today. But he did order one of the earliest massive imperial efforts to connect, expand and impose frontier defences across a newly unified realm. His role was foundational, immense in ambition, even if later ages transformed the result. Chapter 10. The Long Line Beneath the Stars. Before Qin, separate states had already raised regional walls against one another and against northern peoples. After Qin, later dynasties altered those inheritances again. So the Great Wall, as memory holds it, is not a single moment, but a long accumulation. It is a structure of additions, erasures, repairs and returns, a monument not only to command, but to repetition across generations of rulers. Chapter 10. The Long Line Beneath the Stars. In daylight, the wall can seem like pure determination laid across the earth. But at night, its meaning softens. The ridges grow quiet. Towers become silhouettes. The line that once marked danger begins to feel like a thread in the sleeping land. Wind moves where orders once travelled. Grass grows where boots once pressed the soil. Time, more patient than emperors, rests gently over every... Chapter 10. The Long Line Beneath the Stars. Imagine the frontier under stars so cold and clear that every sound seems to drift farther than it should. A watchfire burns low. A sentry listens. Somewhere beyond the next dark ridge lies uncertainty, perhaps riders, perhaps only open land. On nights like this, the wall is less a barrier than a human wish given shape, the wish to know where safety ends and where the unknown begins. Chapter 10. The Long Line Beneath the Stars. Along its length are many histories at once. There is ambition, because empires wanted permanence. There is fear, because danger was never entirely gone. There is labour, because no wall rises without bodies carrying earth, timber, brick and stone. And there is memory, because later generations look back and gather these scattered defences into one vast story. The wall holds all of this, and more. Chapter 10. The Long Line Beneath the Stars. It is easy to imagine walls as silent, but they are full of echoes. Commands shouted across slopes, picks striking ground, cartwheels grinding through dust, horses breathing in winter air, messages carried from tower to tower. Then, after centuries, another kind of sound arrives, the hush of abandonment, the calls of birds, the whisper of weeds through cracked masonry. History never truly disappeared. Chapter 10. The Long Line, Beneath the Stars. For the people who built and guarded these lines, the wall was not yet legend. It was weather, burden, assignment, route and routine. It was a place where food had to arrive, where tools broke, where winters cut deep, and where long distances shaped every thought. The grandeur came later, after memory had widened. In their own time, many knew the wall simply as work, relentless, necessary and close to the body. Chapter 10. The Long Line Beneath the Stars. And still, even in its harshest truth, the wall became part of the landscape in a way no decree could fully control. Rain carved around it. Dust settled into its seams. Mountain shadows crossed it morning and evening. Wild plants rooted in neglected edges. The human effort remained visible, yet the land slowly taught it humility. What seemed impossible in one age became, in another, a way. Chapter 10. The Long Line Beneath the Stars. Perhaps that is why the wall endures so strongly in the imagination. It is both historical and symbolic, a real defence built under specific rulers, and also a vast image of what states attempt when they try to command uncertainty. It stands at the meeting point of geography and power. Mountains, deserts and grasslands remain themselves, while empires rise, name themselves, while empires rise, name them, cross them, and eventually. Chapter 10. The Long Line Beneath the Stars. Qin Shi Huang sought lasting order through scale. Roads, laws, standard measures and walls all expressed the same imperial instinct, to gather the many into one, and hold that one together by force and design. Yet the centuries after him reveal a gentler truth. No structure remains fixed in meaning. Every generation inherits what came before, then alters it. Even the longest what came before, then alters it. Chapter 10. The Long Line Beneath the Stars. If you follow the wall in thought, it does not move in a straight line through history. It appears, fades, returns and changes form. Some sections are buried, some are restored, some survive only in records or in the lifted shape of an old ridge. The Great Wall is therefore not one object alone, but a chain of intentions, some preserved in stone, others left only as traces beneath grass and moonlight. Chapter 10. The Long Line Beneath the Stars. There is comfort, strangely, in this layeredness. The wall was never perfect, never complete, never the final answer its makers may have hoped for. And yet it mattered. It shaped movement, attention, planning and memory. It gave form to anxiety, even when it could not erase danger. Human beings often build this way, not to end uncertainty forever, but to live beside it with. Chapter 10. The Long Line Beneath the Stars. Now the story widens beyond one emperor, one dynasty, or one campaign season. The wall belongs to many centuries, and to countless unnamed lives. Workers pressing earth into frames. Officers reading orders by lamplight. Families waiting far away. Messengers riding along bleak paths. Masons setting brick in later ages. Visitors pausing in stillness much later. Chapter 10. The Long Line Beneath the Stars. Under moonlight, the wall seems to breathe with the terrain. It climbs where mountains lift. It dips where valleys open. It follows the logic of the land while also resisting it, as if human purpose and earth were briefly negotiating. In that quiet meeting lies its strange beauty, not perfection, but persistence, not invincibility, but endurance. A long line saying, across centuries, that someone wants. Chapter 10. The Long Line Beneath the Stars. If we listen gently, the wall asks for balance in remembrance. To admire the scale is natural. To forget the suffering would be too easy. To reduce everything to cruelty alone would also flatten the past. History is rarely only one thing. Here, grandeur and grief stand close together. The wall survives because ambition drove it upward, and because labour, often hard and anonymous, carried that ambition into the earth. Chapter 10. The Long Line Beneath the Stars. So the final image is not of conquest, but of distance. A pale wall running over dark ridges. Towers resting under quiet stars. wind moving through passes once thick with alarms. The empire that ordered one great phase of construction is gone. The dynasties that rebuilt after it are gone as well. Yet the line remains in memory and stone, thinner now, softer now, but still stretching through. Chapter 10. The long line beneath the stars. Let the centuries settle around it. Let names grow quiet. Let commands fade into the broader silence of mountains. What once was urgent becomes distant. What once seemed permanent becomes fragile. And yet fragility has its own kind of grace. The wall does not need to be complete to be meaningful. Its broken places speak as clearly as its strong ones, perhaps even more clearly, because time has touched them without disguise. Chapter 10. The long line beneath the stars. Somewhere along those heights, night deepens. The stones cool. The last colour slips from the horizon. A path curls away from a watchtower and disappears into shadow. Nothing is demanded of you here. No emperor is calling. No messenger is arriving. There is only the slow outline of the wall, the open sky above it, and the calm knowledge that all human striving eventually rests beneath the stars. Chapter 10. The long line beneath the stars. As this story comes to rest, remember Qin Shi Huang as one powerful beginning, not the author of every wall, but a ruler whose vast command helped set one enduring tradition in motion. After him came rebuilding, extension, reinvention, and remembrance. The Great Wall is larger than any single reign. It is a long inheritance of earth, stone, fear, hope, and time, carried forward long after the First Order. Chapter 10. The long line beneath the stars. And now, in the quiet beyond the telling, imagine the wall far away in moonlit stillness, crossing mountains, fading into distance, holding the faint echoes of labour and longing. The night is wide. The ridgelines are dark and gentle. History loosens its grip and becomes landscape once more. Let the long line drift softly through your thoughts, and then, like the long line drift softly through your thoughts, and then, like the last